John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. The election is over, but the fallout is profound. Not only did Republicans claim the White House, but also the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. The reverberations are not only political, but social as well. And even the media is waking up to the fact that the path forward may be returning to the bedrocks of journalism. Tough, but fair coverage. There seems to be an appetite for that in America. Charles Lipson is a professor emeritus at University of Chicago. He writes regularly for Spectator magazine, Real Clear Politics, and others. And his columns are available for free at charleslipson.com. Charles, great to see you again.
It's great to be with you.
Charles, just give me the overview. What did this election tell us?
Well, the first thing it told us is that the American people are really tired of being governed poorly. They're tired of a sluggish economy. They're tired of forever wars. And they're, I think, tired of being ruled by mid-level bureaucrats rather than by duly passed laws, not only in Washington, but at the state and local level.
So this is a lashback at the system, not necessarily, I mean, do you view it as a mandate, as the Trump folks put it, for Donald Trump? I mean, there's all this argument now that he may not even win, 50% of the popular vote when it's all said and done.
The whole system that the Anglo-Americans use, the first past the post system, is really designed to convert relatively small victories in terms of total numbers and total number of states and so forth into a large electoral mandate. The fact is, he has a slim mandate, if you can even call it that. The country is deeply divided. They're deeply divided about Donald Trump personally, and they're deeply divided about a number of issues. And I would say that the other thing that strikes me as someone who's watched American politics for a long time is how deeply ideological, almost theological, our differences are now. So if you tell me what your views are on 2 or 3 issues, I can probably predict what they are on 6 or 7 others.
I hear you loud and clear. I think you start to get this divide where if somebody's over here on a couple of these issues, they probably are down the line on the others.
And people think that those who are on the other side of many of these issues are among the damned.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, I'm very curious as the postmortem is kind of coming in on the Democrats. First of all, again, an overview. How did we flip this whole thing where the party of the working class, the Democrats, are now the party, it appears, of the more highly educated and the coastal elites and high tech? What happened? And now the Republican Party is speaking more for the common working American.
You have nailed something that is, I think, that one of the deepest and most important changes in American politics. This is sometimes called an electoral realignment, and they only happen every 30, 40, 50 years. There was one in 1896. There was one under Franklin Roosevelt. This one started a while back, but if you think about Harry Truman and a kind of ordinary working guy who was sort of carried a lunch pail in the 40s to work, that was a Democrat in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and now that person is a Republican. And if you think about the wealthier suburbs in around Cleveland or around Chicago or around San Francisco, those places used to be Republican, and now they are Democrat. And so there's a dramatic change. But I think there are also changes on a number of social policies and just a very deep debate and a deep divide in the country.
Let me throw at you, this is one of the postmortem polls that the Democrats are apparently paying a lot of attention to. A poll from Puck and Echelon Insights found that a majority of Americans, not by much, but 51%, now dislike the Democratic Party and think of Donald Trump more favorably than any national Democrat. That's a sea change.
It's a sea change, but I think that the challenge on the Republican side, remember, the day that Donald Trump is sworn in, he's a lame duck. He'll act. One of the reasons that he's making these dramatic change appointments is that he wants to have a big impact and he wants to have it quickly. He won't have 8 years. He may not even have 4, in the sense that he may not have a political mandate to go beyond the first 2 years,
right,
because we don't know what will happen to control of Congress after 2 years, after the midterm. But I do think that big changes are coming, and I think that that's the reason that he chose J.D. Vance as his vice president. He wants to solidify a long-term change in what the Republican Party is.
It's so interesting that a guy who comes from wealth is kind of tapping into that blue dog Democrat. You know, this is a whole nother approach. Let me ask you about some of these appointments.
Let me say one thing about his wealth.
Okay.
His wealth comes from building things, although he inherited a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's not, I think it made a big difference to people that he built tangible things. It wasn't that he was in the stock market and just manipulating zeros and ones on a computer. And I would also say that for all of the hyperbole and showmanship and everything, when Donald Trump was behind the counter at McDonald's, when he drove the dump truck and so forth, there was a certain kind of authenticity to him. I mean, he can identify with ordinary people. I don't think he has any trouble doing that.
No, and there's another part of that, I think, that is part of his charm. He's not a politician who goes to Iowa to campaign for the caucuses and puts on dungarees and overalls. He still shows up in the same uni that he always wears, the suit, the tie. He's not trying to be something he's not.
I think that's exactly right. There was an old Bob Dylan song that talked about politicians are eating chitlins, they're eating bagels, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and there is some charm in that because he's not pretending to be something he's not. You kind of, what you see is what you get. The most intriguing of all of this is this DOGE business.
Yes.
Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Department of Government Efficiency. They are talking about trying to find maybe $2 trillion worth of garbage within the government that they can cut out, including entire departments. Do you think that bears fruit? Because most of the academics say, you know, unless you get at Social Security and entitlements, you're not going to really attack this deficit issue. That government waste and all that is really highly overrated. What's your take?
I think that it's a big deal. I think they'll accomplish a lot, and I think they'll meet really intense resistance. The main thing to understand about the Democratic Party is it's the party of government. That is, since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, large portions of the federal government have been a construction of the Democratic Party. And even when Republicans have governed, they've governed within that broad sense that more and more power needs to be concentrated in Washington. So Richard Nixon created the EPA,
right,
for example.
Right.
So, but I think the big figures in this are LBJ and actually Barack Obama, who put the final keystone in with health insurance, government health insurance, which used to be called socialist medicine. So I think that there will be big cuts, but I think that there'll be a lot of resistance to that. Let me tell you who I think when I see that, I actually think of Ronald Reagan and the tax cuts. What Ronald Reagan did when he lowered taxes was he did more than just lower taxes. He eliminated all the myriad barnacles that had been put into the tax code. So taxes get set at one level, let's call it 28%, and then over time, different interest groups lobby to have their special situations get special treatment. So I think that the problem that DOGE is going to hit at is not only government employment and the large number of people there, but the regulatory state, the administrative state, where most of the rules, they're effectively laws that people live by, are dictated to them by people who've never been elected and aren't really closely supervised by anybody who's been elected.
With all of this effort to try to streamline government, do you see any possibility of trying to redo the Byzantine, ridiculous tax code?
I think that that'll come later in the administration, where they may go to try to simplify the tax code. And it remains to be seen how they want to do that, or whether Trump wants to do something very big, which would be to replace the income tax with something like a national sales tax called the VAT. I don't know what they'll do, but he has not made that a priority initially, and you can't make everything a priority. If everything's a priority, nothing is. So I think what they'll go after right now is trimming the government and going after the regulatory state. And then I think that there's going to be a lot of negotiation with foreign countries on letting our products in. One thing to remember about Trump is that he's a negotiator. So when he says that he's deeply concerned about X, Y, or Z, he may not want to change our principles there. He may just want to get a better deal.
Yeah, I get the same. I get the same
Yep.
feeling. People take, you got to decode him a little bit. People
Right.
take him literally when he talks about these tariffs. To me, and it's all outlined in The Art of the Deal, when he goes crazy on tariffs and makes these statements that are kind of outlandish, and a lot of people on the right don't like these tariffs, it's an opening negotiation. It's not literal.
I think that's right. I would say on a lot of the tariffs, I think he staked a lot of his presidency on resuscitating American manufacturing. And part of that is going to be drill, baby, drill. So they'll get the cost of energy down. And that's not just something that you see at the gas pump. Every dozen eggs you buy and every carton of milk has been transported by a trucker and all the rest. So
Not to mention petroleum in all of the products we use.
absolutely.
Everything.
So they're going, I think you're right, but I think he wants to restore a lot of American manufacturing. And that means bringing it home from China, bringing it home from Mexico, and so forth. So it remains to be seen. Now, in the case of Mexico, part of the deal could be he got the Mexicans. The Democrats said, oh, you never got the Mexico to pay for the wall like you said, and so forth. That's true, but he was able to negotiate with Mexico so that they put tens of thousands of Mexican troops on the border to keep people from crossing into the United States.
Yeah.
I think one of the most controversial policies won't be building the wall and keeping people out, but deciding what to do with people who are here, came into the country illegally, and are not part of criminal gangs.
Yes.
They'll go after the gangs first.
Yep.
And by the way, there's a big problem with unaccompanied minor children.
Huge.
The government has now lost something like 300,000
Yeah,
of
it's
them.
approaching that number, and they probably don't know. Final thing, what is the biggest pitfall that you see for Trump 2.0? What's the danger zone?
Well, first of all, if he doesn't get control of DOJ and the intelligence agencies, they will go after him as they did the first time with the Russian hoax and so forth. That's the reason why appointing Tulsi Gabbard was a mistake. He needs somebody like John Radcliffe, who will be at CIA, who really knows the intelligence agencies to get hold of them. Otherwise, and he needs somebody really good at the FBI, not to go after his enemies, but to prevent mid-level FBI people from using lawfare against him as they have over the last several years.
So you think those
I think that's the biggest danger.
Those attempts you believe will happen again?
They could. And I think that the issues about deportation will be extremely controversial. Some of the education stuff may be controversial to teachers and so forth, but I think a lot of parents would like to see that money returned to the states and allowed and directed toward children and not toward people who live in homes in Bethesda, Maryland.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Charles Lipson, great to see you again. It's always a pleasure. Professor Emeritus, University of Chicago, writes regularly for The Spectator and Real Clear Politics, and his columns are available free of charge at charleslipson.com. Charles, thanks again. It's good to have you on the
Truly
program.
my pleasure, and I want the people in Phoenix to know it's about to snow here in Chicago.
Well, my son's there at Roosevelt University, so he'll get a taste of that. Charles, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great to see you. Coming up next, petroleum analyst Patrick De Haan from GasBuddy on what these new refining rules in California will mean to us in Arizona. Many are predicting higher gas prices. Back in a minute on Newsmaker. Welcome back on Newsmaker. Recently, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a new law to require oil refineries in California to maintain a minimum inventory of fuel to avoid shortages that caused price spikes, costing Californians billions over the years. But that decision could affect supply and prices here in Arizona. Patrick De Haan is a petroleum analyst with GasBuddy, kind enough to spend some time with us on Newsmaker. Good to see you, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about this decision in California, because I know Governor Hobbs here and the Governor Lombardo of Nevada, they both signed letters urging Gavin Newsom to kind of reconsider this because it's going to affect us.
Well, and it always does. California's refineries supply gasoline not just to California, but much of Nevada as well as Arizona. So what California enacts and the requirements it puts on refiners can have a secondary impact on other markets like Nevada and Arizona. And so this should give refineries and folks who use gasoline pause and a bit of concern, because it further tightens and leads to new regulations that could challenge the amount of gasoline supply available. In fact, one refinery in California is already considering shutting down a refinery in the years ahead. It's become very costly for refineries to do business in California. And not only would that affect supply in California, but also markets like Arizona, which are seeing populations boom. And so that could very much have a major impact, not on just California's gas prices, but Arizona and Nevada as well.
Yeah, and you know, when Gavin Newsom made this statement when he was signing the bill, he said the oil companies continue to lie. They are the polluted heart of the climate crisis. I mean, it sounds like California is fully at war with big oil.
Well, and it absolutely is. It's part of the reason why there are fewer refineries in California than there ever have been. You have to look at the rest of the nation where refinery capacity is down just a couple percentage points. And in California, it's like 3 or 4 times as low compared to the rest of the nation. So California is kind of chasing away refineries by over-regulating, and it's created this unique circumstance now that California is having to regulate things like inventory. So many refineries have left that there's not enough supply in California. So now California is continuing the stranglehold with new regulation that's likely to continue to chase refineries away, not incentivize them to necessarily do business in California.
Okay, I've got a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. With this kind of lining up as a political football, that a blue state doesn't really want this industry in their state, Do you have to have a waterway to be a refining state? Could Arizona get into that business? Is that completely untenable? Is that something that states that feel like they're kind of locked out might entertain?
Well, it's a challenge because the infrastructure may not exist to get that oil from, say, California over to Arizona. And that's what a refinery would need. And that's been the problem so far, is that refineries in California have a little bit more access to pipelines. But California had also been a producer of crude oil. Of course, that crude oil production has dropped significantly. But now refineries in California are accessing crude oil from other markets. If suddenly you were to build refineries in Arizona, the biggest question is, where is the oil that they refine going to come from? You'd have to build pipelines, which would need approval. Not only that, but you'd need a new refinery to be built, which is also problematic.
Yeah, and probably hard to get it permitted. Maybe more favorable in the next 4 years, but who knows beyond that. And it's hard to look out over the horizon and figure out what the politics might be. 4, 8, 16 years from
exactly
now.
Right. I mean, California, in the interim to this policy and requiring additional inventory be held, the California Air Resources Board just a few days ago put more policy on things by requiring refineries in California to further reduce the carbon intensity of gasoline. And that could have a negative net impact, again, another negative net impact on Arizona and Nevada. So it's not just the inventory holding requirement, but the Air Resources Board now reducing carbon intensity, and that is surely going to draw the ire of refineries and could push some refineries to close in California.
Can you strip away, Patrick, if you will, kind of the politics from this? It's almost impossible, but I'm trying to decode what Gavin Newsom is saying. He's saying that because there are fluctuations in supply in California, he's asking the refineries to hold a minimum so that they don't have these price spikes up and down. Is that putting it on the refineries? Is this political cover for him, or what is going on? Can you decode this?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the years, because of the loss in California's gasoline or refiners, there's fewer refiners able to supply the market. So when a refinery has an unexpected outage, as we've covered many times, it's more problematic because there's nobody that can say step in the void, because California, essentially through regulation, has pushed refineries to leave the state. So now, because the bleeding is so bad, California is trying to say, well, we've lost a lot of refineries, but we're going to require that you guys all make up and have enough supply on hand so that if something does happen, we don't experience shockwaves of the market.
So what does Arizona do? If you're the governor right now, you're Governor Hobbs for 30 seconds. What do you do to try to address this so Arizonans don't get sticker shock?
You know, it's very problematic because, like we said, infrastructure would have to be built. You'd have to have incentives, and refining is not a very profitable sector right now. But the one thing that comes to mind, gasoline does flow from Texas. There could be something there. The other problem that Arizona has that's relatively unique is, like California, Arizona and areas of Phoenix have special blends of gasoline that are different than the rest of the state. If California and Arizona were to come up with a joint requirement, that could also ease this problem.
Remind people for a quick second, Patrick, why we have these different blends. It's for environmental reasons, mainly ozone during the summer or winter months.
That's exactly it. And for areas of Arizona, with the population boom, with millions of vehicles and with air temperatures much warmer, that can create low-level ozone, which then becomes unhealthy for certain groups. And so there are cleanliness standards, emission standards that essentially guide the volatility of gasoline, which lead to cleaner air.
Okay, we got 30 seconds. Do you see a time where we're going to not need gasoline, that we're going to be all electrified? People keep talking about this, but it seems highly unlikely to me.
Well, I think California continues to make the transition. The problem is how lumpy is it going to be? As they add electric vehicles, they're going to need less gasoline consumption. But at the rate they're going now, gasoline refineries and refineries are going to shut down potentially faster than a decrease in demand. So really the only way out of this is build more infrastructure or increase incentives. That would create some breathing room when it comes to the balance of supply and demand.
Patrick De Haan, always interesting. Patrick De Haan with GasBuddy, petroleum analyst. We really appreciate your time, Patrick. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, take care. We're back in a moment on Newsmaker. Thanks to Charles Lipson again and Patrick De Haan. Interesting conversation. We will see you next week on Newsmaker.